All right, thank you for joining us. My name is Matthew Bissett, and I'm here with my co-host and good friend John Vandenbeld, and we are bringing you the first broadcast of Real Sensical Politics, a show that we aim to address Canadian issues and political matters to a way that will really make sense to the average person. How this kind of came about is John and I were discussing the recent 2025 leadership debate in our living room. And my wife says, you guys should make a podcast. And my wife, Ashley, she's not very politically aware, at least as much as she wants to be, because she just finds the whole thing as a turnoff. And I think a lot of the podcasts out there, they really lean one way or the other, as far as political right, political left. And so we're trying to do something a little different here and really balance it out. I admittedly am a little lean closer to the right of center. And John, you're a little bit closer to the left.
Yeah, I'd say that that's accurate. And Matt, being a long married man, does what his wife says, so it's pretty smart. I definitely noticed when I was looking at podcasts that they tend to be very partisan, and I find that to be really annoying. So I think both you and I have a ability to speak about both sides of an issue and understand both sides of the issue, and I'm definitely closer to the center than I am to the left, and I would say you're probably closer to the center than you are to the right. So we aim for some balanced, hopefully illuminating, hopefully at times humorous and provocative discussion, and happy that you're joining us today.
Yeah, excellent. So a little bit about myself. I have been living and breathing politics since I was 16. We'll date myself a little bit, but we're running on 24 years here. A variation of volunteer work in politics, campaigns, in the war room, federal, provincial, municipal. And my most previous stint in politics was 5 years at the legislature of Alberta, working most recently as a policy advisor to ministers of the Crown. And that was quite the experience. So that's kind of where I come from. I take politics at a very practical standpoint. What does it really mean in real terms? John is more of an academic, perhaps I would say.
I do know a thing or two about political history. Matt's real strength is in policy and, having your background both in the partisan side of things and also the policy side of things. Like Matt said, I have more of an academic understanding of politics, although I have volunteered as a door knocker and caller and solicitor of funds for political parties, so I know a little bit about that, but
haven't we both?
It's always the getting money. Getting money and getting votes. That's really what parties are about.
Well, and we've also both worked on the very nonpartisan end of running elections and ballots, polling stations in our local areas. We were both recently central poll supervisors in the federal election here in 2025. So that gives us some perspective too on the very nonpartisan operation of how the electoral system works.
Yeah, and I think both of us understand is that there's politics, which is kind of the art of manipulating people to get people elected, and then there's policy and governance, which are two very different things, and have different kind of methods about going about them. So sometimes what can be very, very good politics can be very bad policy and result in bad government.
True story.
But there's the intersection of you don't want to be kind of the right fighter that has all these great ideas but can never implement it because you don't have the kind of political Machiavellian skill to get into office. So you have to be a politician before you're a statesman.
True enough, and that's perhaps one of the weaknesses of democracy, but I think that's a topic for another time. Today, it being Canada Day, our first episode, we thought it was prudent to maybe touch base on a very brief history of Canada, how it came to be, and a few other issues reaching around Canada and how we see ourselves as a state. And so, to start us off, our academic, John, will touch us briefly on the history of Canada.
Yeah, it's very very broad topic. So Canada as a institution, as a dominion, came together on July 1st, 1867. It's when our first Prime Minister John A. Macdonald in Charlottetown with a bunch of other old rich white guys signed a paper saying we are now the Dominion of Canada, which included Upper Canada, now modern day Ontario. That's Upper Canada's Quebec, Lower Canada, Ontario, and then New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So those were the original confederation. Later, we had PEI come in, I think, in 1870, and then BC in 1871. Then you had the Western provinces. Louis Riel was the founder of Manitoba, essentially in 1870. Interesting guy, Louis Riel. Very very mixed legacy.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Fascinating figure, and a real key member of the early history of Canada. Both from Indigenous and Francophone perspective. So fascinating guy. And then we had the Western provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan, Alberta and Saskatchewan in 1905. And then pulling up the rear was, they're not going to like this in Newfoundland, but you had Joey Smallwood and Newfoundland in 1949. They became a member of Confederation after making a right mess of things in the Great Depression and running up. I think they ran up. I think this is literally true. I think they ran up $600 million worth of debt in like the 1930s. I can't imagine how much that would be.
Well, that's like Justin Trudeau in the last 10 years.
Except
that was billions.
There you go. So still 600 million in 1935 or 1940 was a massive amount of money. Yeah. So, and our evolution is quite different from the Americans in that we are still a British, not Dominion necessarily, but we're a Commonwealth country. We maintain that connection to the United Kingdom, and to this day we have a king with money of royal family on our money. Images of royal families, so that's very distinct from our American brethren to the south. The Loyalists, which were largely escaping the American Revolution, formed the basis of a lot of the folks that were around in Ontario and became kind of the political elite there in the 17 and 1800s. So our motto here in Canada is peace, order, and good government, which doesn't perhaps stir the soul like life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but I think they're worthy objectives.
And I think I would say, and my studies in political science in university kind of gave me a little bit more of an appreciation for this. Peace, order, and good government does not necessarily mean government that you agree with, particularly on the good side. It really just means that they are, to a decent extent, making sure that government operations are running, people are getting paid, social checks are going out, and that there is a peaceful transition of government come the election. So, good government does not necessarily mean government that you agree with. It's just simply, government that is at least relatively doing its job.
Yeah, I would view good government less as a objective term and more as a normative term, which is to say, like, effective government. Because good is, like, policy objectives are, some people think they're good and some people don't think they're good. But efficient government, like you said, involves contracts being paid, people being paid, roads being passable, people having ability to go to school, planes flying, immigrants getting into the country. Like these are good things, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but we have like a history of Canada. There are podcasts that are 200, 300 episodes deep that dive into the intricacies of history of Canada. But that's a a very, very high level overview, which is more to say than anything is that Canada was always and continues to evolve, both territorially and in terms of powers of the provinces, and it's I think less of a or more of a fluid situation than in a lot of other countries, and we're going to get into later on some discussion around the Alberta government's relationship and desire for new powers, perhaps, from the federal government. And that's something that I don't think you'd ever really see in certainly the United States and a lot of other countries
Yeah.
where things are a lot more fixed and those conversations aren't really being had. But in Canada, it's always been a matter of we're kind of steadily moving away from a very Anglo-British identity and moving towards something that is Canadian. And what does that mean? Well, we don't know. And we're, the last 160 years has kind of been collectively deciding what does that look like? What do we want this new entity called Canada to look like?
Well, absolutely. And especially in the last, I would even say 10, 15 years. And this brings us to our next kind of topic of discussion, truth and reconciliation. The way that Canada evolved and grew, much like the States, the Indigenous peoples were not treated very well. And, especially the most recent issues that have come up regarding residential schools and the pain that was caused there. It's really brought up, when we're thinking about Canada and who we are and where we're going. In 2023, I remember several cities across Canada decided not to celebrate Canada Day because they were very, I guess they were more ashamed than anything else of where we had come from. And so, we're going to have a little bit of discussion about truth and reconciliation and whether Canada Day is something that is worth celebrating, which, as a side note here quickly, I would say that it is. But we'll have a bit of a conversation about that.
Yeah, and it's a difficult discussion to have. You can't see this on the podcast, but we're two middle-aged white guys, and definitely come from that perspective. I remember when I was growing up, I wasn't aware of any ambiguity around Canadian identity, especially around Canada Day. Canada Day for me was fireworks and parades
Yep.
and barbecues, and we didn't even talk about the colonial past. That I wasn't aware of that until I was in university. I'd never heard of residential schools. I'd never heard of the '60s scoop. I'd never heard of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So it wasn't something, at least growing up in Calgary, that I was aware of. We definitely in Canada have a very mixed history and some very dark and ugly parts. And I'm glad that those are coming to light in subsequent years, since I grew up. I'm in my mid-40s now. One thing that I dislike, certainly, and I'm happier this year, is I'm very proud to be a Canadian. I feel very lucky to be in this country, and I think for all its warts, it is the best country in the world. And also, because being grateful for to live in Canada and live in this place and our freedoms, it's not mutually exclusive. It doesn't mean, okay, we don't care about the colonial past and we don't want to write that past. I think it's a both and. I think you can celebrate Canada Day and also work towards reconciliation. Again, though, I understand that I'm coming from a place of privilege in that opinion.
Yeah. Well, and, as you say, we're both middle-aged white guys. We both come from that state of privilege as far as that's concerned. And I think for me, especially, 10 years ago, I was kind of the frame of mind, I was not around to offend anybody, and anybody that's around now was not around to be offended when the issues around treaties and violations and land were taking place. And certainly, didn't really know much about residential schools. Um, but to reflect back and know that the last residential school was operating as late as 1996,
Yeah.
that really changes things and saying, yeah, there are indigenous people alive today that were harmed by this. And well, I personally myself may not have initiated any of that. I need to be aware and sensitive to the fact that the history of the ancestry that I came from was part of that. And so, we talk about being proud to be Canadian, and I think it's very important personally, and where I've come to is that in order for any of this to heal as a nation, we need to accept that it happened, and then we need to work together and move forward rather than constantly being marred down by past wrongs. And I'm not trying to say not to acknowledge them, because it's important to acknowledge them. If we don't learn from history, history repeats itself. So we definitely want to talk about this. I appreciate that it's being discussed more in schools, because it definitely wasn't for us. But does it mean that you can't be proud to be Canadian? Well, as John said, of course not. It's still something amazing to be Canadian, to be a Canadian citizen, to have the rights and the freedoms that we have. And as John reflected, we're all kind of reflecting on who we are and evolving as a country. And I think as long as we acknowledge and we continue to strive to evolve, that really is the key to all of this. And the fact that we're doing that and we're trying to move forward, that's something to be very proud of.
Yeah, like I remember when I worked for the provincial archives, which wasn't all that long ago. Also, go to the archives; it's a fantastic place if you're in Edmonton. I was doing like social media for them, and I quite often used terms like pioneers and groundbreakers when referring to white settlers, and just kind of not being really aware of any of that language. And what that language suggests, by its very nature, is that this was virgin land that didn't have a history and didn't have anyone living there, and nothing has been further from the truth. So, and that was in 2017, and thankfully someone kind of took me aside gracefully and said, "Are you aware of the implications of this language?" So I'm very grateful for that. But again, and I'm definitely grateful that kids are learning more about this in schools. Increasingly, I kind of look at younger generations, and they look at us kind of as these knuckle draggers. And like we grew up, certainly I did, in like this was not talked about at all.
No.
And I can't even imagine my parents or my grandparents like that. It just wasn't talked about. Mm-hmm. So certainly with myself, I think I'm much more aware of these things now. It's an evolution. I think it's going to take time, and I really think that most Canadians want to work towards reconciliation, and want to work towards some sort of further understanding of Indigenous issues. I'm not, like, for me, I'm not really entirely sure how to do it. And I definitely recoil a little bit around this narrative around, well, you're to blame for this, and I maybe I'm just being oversensitive about that, but I don't think you get a lot of enthusiasm when you're going at people kind of shaking a bony finger and saying you're to blame for this.
Yeah, I don't think that shame is going to help anyone. And certainly not the movements to try to erase monuments of Sir John A. Macdonald, for example. That's not going to help anyone. As I said before, like if we don't learn history, we're going to repeat it. It's human nature to do so. Um, Perhaps guiding this conversation a little bit around reconciliation from an economic perspective. One of the reasons why Indigenous issues in Canada have been so sensitive and Indigenous people have been so wronged, I would say, is there's been this push to grow Canada, but only within the past 10, 15 years has there really been a push to include Indigenous peoples in those conversations. Um, and I can really only speak from my experience in the Alberta government as a staffer. I kind of really appreciated Jason Kenney, the former premier's mindset around reconciliation, and he coined the phrase reconciliation. I don't know if anybody out there has really heard that phrase, but I know that I've sat around committee tables and ministerial tables with Indigenous leaders and chiefs from around Alberta, and I have heard them positively react and use the phrase reconciliation. And I'll take just a sharp dig at the left here just for a moment. In 2015, when a lot of this was coming to light and the Truth and Reconciliation report was coming in, we had an NDP government here in Alberta. And one of the things across Canada, even that really became a thing as part of Truth and Reconciliation, was land acknowledgements at the beginning of events or political speeches, and it was talk. And I know that I talked to a lot of Indigenous peoples and leaders as a staffer that really just they appreciated the sentiment, but they didn't appreciate that it tended to stop with the sentiment. And love Jason Kenney, hate Jason Kenney as a conservative. He was very determined to change that narrative and go more and actually do something and take action to reconciliation. And so he came up with the term reconciliation. And part of what his government did was they introduced the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. And that really is a giant fund that allows Indigenous led corporations to grow more and to have more of an economic place here in modern society and really have the chance to succeed and grow, particularly when it comes to trades and energy here in Alberta. So, that's something interesting that I've seen, and I think that's important as we move forward. Is it can't be an us and them conversation. They need to be an equal and recognized valuable partner in economic growth as we move forward. And I thought the AIOC was an excellent start to that.
Yeah, well, and that's really, I think, useful. You don't hear a lot of good things about Jason Kenney, but any politician, certainly someone like Jason Kenney, who's been in government or was in government for a long time, they leave legacies. Well, most of them, positive legacies, and I definitely think that's one of them. The relationships with Indigenous people, as you know, and as probably most of our listeners know, their relationship is with the Crown. It's with the federal government. So that's always a complication when addressing the needs of Indigenous people. Is you have their relationship with the Crown, but the provincial responsibilities are to provide healthcare and schools. But like I have friends working up in Indigenous health facilities that are federally run, so it's kind of a bit messy. And then you have like different Indigenous communities. You have a whole bunch of different communities that each have different representatives and different wants and needs. Like I think basically what political representatives, regardless of their ethnicity, want is they want more economic opportunities and better lives for themselves and their children. That's, shared across generations and time and
Yeah.
ethnicities. But what that looks like in practice is very different. And then, as you know, you have the difficulties, or maybe not difficulties, but challenges around the hereditary chiefs versus the elected chiefs, and who is the legitimate representative of that community.
Yeah.
And that's especially relevant when you're talking about energy projects and approval of that over Indigenous land, which we'll get into later on in our discussion.
Yeah, yeah, and that's very key, and it's a problem that currently exists within the wording of the legislation. Is they talk about Indigenous consultation, and it's kind of broad, but then the government starts doing consultation with the elected chiefs, and then the hereditary chiefs throw up their arms and say, "Well, what about us? We weren't consulted." And then you end up in a great big legal mess of were they consulted, were they not? And energy projects get stalled. And as John said, we'll talk a little bit more about energy projects in a moment. Um, but yeah, this is all key around reconciliation, and I think recognizing that there is a large problem, and I became sensitive to this in the Alberta government around missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls. It's a big issue. Like I never really realized that so many of the missing women in Canada they go missing for any variety of reasons, and it doesn't really matter why. They get taken because people feel that they're invisible.
Yeah, they're invisible and dispensable.
Dispensable, and up until now, law enforcement to a huge degree, had this mentality that, another, missing Indigenous person, we have so many other things to do. Like this is not new, and it gets put on a back burner, and it wasn't really taken seriously. And it shocked me how big of an issue this is. And I had the chance as a ministerial assistant to the then Minister Isaac, who was the Associate Minister for Status of Women here in Alberta. We marched with an Indigenous group in downtown Edmonton for MMIWG, and it was powerful. And you learn so much, and you got to come together with this Indigenous community that has been hurting and having these things happen to them. And I can very strongly remember one of the leaders of the march, chanting into the megaphone, "No more missing sisters," and that to me really hit home. And I don't know why that particular phrase just it stuck with me, and it rings in my ears this day. How much pain there was there, but in talking to a lot of the Indigenous peoples at the march, there was still hope that it was going to get better, and I found that to also be very encouraging. There was pain, but there was hope. And something else that was also touching is at the end of the march, when we got to the park where we ended, they spoke the names of the sisters that had gone missing from their communities, and that was also very impactful to hear the names spoken. And some of the stories of who those people were, that was a very touching experience, and one that'll stick with me.
Yeah, well, and I have some expectations about how government will function that for a long time, I thought were universal, and they're not. And my expectations are the government is going to represent my interests. If something happens to me criminally, the government will care and catch the person. Mm-hmm. Governments are, working in my best interests. And I think for our Aboriginal brothers and sisters, they have generations of that not being the case. They have generations of government not really caring for them not being consulted about things that matter to them. And I think certainly in the Indigenous people that I have spoken with, there's a deep sense of cynicism around government, and a deep sense of cynicism, in going back to what you were speaking about with land acknowledgements. I agree with you that there is value in land acknowledgements. I think, though, that the danger is to think, oh, well, there's a land acknowledgement, I don't have to do anything else.
Yeah.
And that just amplifies the cynicism, I think, of Indigenous people.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I've talked to some of them, and they're disgusted by performative displays of allyship. And I think, and I always try to be mindful of this, even when I'm talking, just to be mindful of what I don't know, and not trying to talk as if I do know the situation, or I do have the answers. I think what I'm trying to do more than anything around this is just listen to what people are saying, and try to amplify those voices and reiterate what is being told to me. One of the things that I disliked most about our former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is his performative displays of allyship. It's all wonderful to have manicured hair and talk about how super cool you are. Mm-hmm. There are reservations in northern Ontario that don't have clean drinking water.
Yeah.
So
and he promised that
being super cool and then address
yeah.
this issue.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. If you're going to promise something like clean drinking water to an Indigenous population, and then not deliver on it, I mean, okay, things happen in an electoral cycle. I get it. But then to promise it again and just end your term with still no clean drinking water after 10 years, I can't get there. And that, as John said, that's what I was talking about, governments in the 2015 era really talking about reconciliation, but not actually doing anything around that issue. And it's actually really sad, because I think the reason why a lot of governments in 2015 got elected across Canada is because the Truth and Reconciliation Report was out. It became important to somebody other than just Indigenous people that these issues were addressed. And so it became a political, hot button issue, something that could garner votes. But at the end of the day, it fell flat. And that was very disappointing. Do we care or do we not? I think we need to make that determination. But, coming back around, I think as a nation, I think it's important to say we do care. Even as two middle-aged white guys sitting here with the privilege that we have, we do care. We see you, and we want to reconcile and be one with you here in Canada.
A good question to ask, I think, is in the Truth and Reconciliation Report, there are 91 calls to action. Mm-hmm. Not all of them deal with governments, like some of them have to do with churches, for instance, or libraries and things of that nature. But the vast majority of them are government responsibilities. So if you have this rather smug, pious white guy talking about how much he cares about Indigenous people, I would ask that individual, well, what are you doing to advance these calls to action in the report? Because ultimately, words come and go, but actions are much more meaningful. And there are many, many actions that have not been taken that I think probably should be taken in that Truth and Reconciliation Report, which is now well over 10 years old, I believe. I think that was 2012 or 2013 that came out. So, it's not like, let's get moving on this. This was a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think that's... I don't want to say that that's a good place to leave it, because it's... it's a very deep topic, and I want to make sure that our listeners understand that we very much respect this issue. But as broadcasters here on this podcast, I think one of the things that I want to make our listeners aware of is we want to hear from you. And in time here, we'll have an email address that we set up. And when we have it, we'll let you know what that is, where you can send in feedback, love us, hate us, ask questions. This is very much something the two of us want to be a learning podcast. And the two of us are going to be learning as well. As much stuff as we know, there's always more to learn and other perspectives.
Absolutely. And we've both gone door to door for political candidates. There's nothing you can share in your email that we haven't heard before.
Right. Yeah.
Like I've had people yell at me. I've had dogs sicked on me. I'd have doors slammed in my face. So if you think we're out to lunch, some of my best learnings have been people saying, hey, you're out to lunch for this reason, this reason, this reason.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. And then I get better.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's useful.
Yeah. I've had people scream at me saying that I was working for a crook from across the street while I was trying to talk to somebody else.
Oh, wow. That's never happened to me.
Yeah, people have strong feelings around politics. But I think at the end of the day, it's important to recognize and respect the fact that we can agree to disagree and not be disagreeable. And that's always important to have any kind of a constructive conversation around politics and even in policy advancement within government. So, as I say, we are going to move forward here. Of course, we had a Canadian election a couple months ago, Canadian election federal 2025, where the Right Honourable Mark Carney was elected to be the Prime Minister of Canada. And so, a lot has really been said on this already, and I'm sure people are very semi-well versed on the outcome, obviously. But I think, John, what I might ask you is, as a political scientist and somebody that observes politics, what were the main surprises to you during the 2025 federal election?
Well, I was surprised in the there's kind of two ways I'm going to answer that question. So, what surprised me in the election, based on the polling, it was basically what I expected. It was one of the most fascinating 3 or 4 months periods that I've ever seen in politics. And I was thinking about this the other day. If someone would have told me when I was having my Christmas dinner with the family that the Liberals would come 3 or 4 seats short of a majority government when I was sitting down on the 25th of December 2024, I would have told them that they were, I would have tested them for some sort of hallucinogenic substance. At that point, the Conservatives were 20 to 25 points up in the polls. They were projecting a 250, seat count for them. They were just predicted to completely run the table. So to have the Liberals come back to the extent that they did was remarkable. I was definitely interested to see that Mark Carney was the successor to Justin Trudeau, and knowing that Mark Carney has no background in politics. Politics is a tough game. When you're on the hustings, it's very easy to say something stupid. Look at Kim Campbell. And have that be amplified. And there's a lot of very worthy, good candidates that are just completely undone by the political hurly-burly that happens. And I was a little worried as someone who very much liked Carney for a long period of time, that he would be just kind of red meat to someone like Poilievre, who was a very political animal. I was also very surprised at the extent of the gender gap. The Conservative Party is increasingly a young male party, and people of my mom's age voted Liberal, I think 60 or 70%. So the older folks, which had historically leaned more conservative, it kind of the polarities reversed there a little bit. I was also surprised and a little disheartened and heartened in a way to see the demise of the NDP. The NDP has historically provided a really, in my view, useful third party that drove a lot of really progressive Canadian initiatives. I was not ever a fan of Jagmeet Singh. I found him to be performative and out of touch. So I was quite happy that a party led by him crashed and burned as bad as it did. But as an institution, I think the NDP is on, if not life support, then they're definitely not doing well. The 2025 election result was their lowest count ever. They'd been in a party since 1961, replacing the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. And in all the elections from 1961 to 2025, they've never gotten less seats and they've never gotten a lower percentage of the votes. So, and their leader came third in his own riding. I don't know if that's ever happened. You've had leaders lose their own riding. Like Poilievre lost his own riding, but he lost it by, I don't know, 2,500 votes or something. Jagmeet Singh came third, and a poor third. So, and I saw time and time again, looking at the polls and talking to left-leaning friends of mine, many NDP longtime stalwarts ran for cover to the Liberal Party, both out of fear of Poilievre, a dislike of Singh, and a certain someone named Donald Trump also had an outsized role in the election outcome, given his political rhetoric and 51st state sentiments and stuff like that.
Did he end up making Canada great again? I guess time will tell, but certainly not directly, as he'd like to claim. I think for me, I was surprised that, the two leaders lost their seats.
Well, three if you count the co-leader of the Green Party.
Co-leader. That's always
who does though?
I think not much of the Green Party, but for the three major political parties and for the NDP to lose party status, and then Poilievre to lose his seat, I found that to be very interesting. And Poilievre had held his seat in Carleton for quite some time. So
20 years almost, I think.
That was very, very surprising, and a major turnaround. And what I personally take is somebody that has been around the political campaign block a few times, a major failure, and this has been said many times, but a major failure of the Conservative campaign manager to change focus even before the election when Carney, signed the scrapping of the consumer carbon tax in regulations. That was the point where they really needed to stop saying carbon tax Carney, and they needed to move on to something more substantive that they could actually nail him with. And there were lots of missed opportunities, and we really won't go into those because I think some people's eyes may glaze over. But, Poilievre was going to have an opportunity here shortly to run in Alberta by-election for a Canadian seat. Widely expected to win that. I can't say that I would eat my shoe, but I would certainly swallow my pride if the Liberals were to win that riding. It's
that would be beyond shocking. That's about as blue as a riding as you're gonna find. Yeah,
it's a very, very rural Alberta riding, and I don't even think Poilievre would have to show up anywhere to win that seat. Something that I might say that when we're talking about leaders losing their seats, it's kind of a risk that federal leaders take. And it's not common for leaders to lose their own seat. It's common for their party to lose, of course. Only one can win. But federal leaders have to run across the country in 30 days. And they don't really get the chance to have that personal touch in their riding. So it's a lot of staffers, and when emotions are running so high as they did this last time, as John mentioned, Donald Trump and the 51st state, people really were very focused, I think, on we need one person to ride this out. Mark Carney is currently in the driver's seat. He is a stark difference from Justin Trudeau, and we are comfortable seeing where he goes. He seems to have, created this great sense of confidence in his ability to manage the situation. And it really is still too early to say whether or not that's going to work out. But, I have some cautious optimism of the situation. I think the G7 went about as well for 6 of the 7 nations as it could have, given the Trump's chaos and everything. Um, but I think one of the other things that surprised me was prior to the election, with the polling that was happening with the Conservatives, as John mentioned, Christmas time, January 2025. I did not see the Liberals making a comeback. And I thought that it was going to be one of these times where the electorate said, you know what, Liberals, you've had your chance. We're done with you. I didn't realize that the disfavor was so much about Justin Trudeau and not necessarily about the Liberals. I thought he had poisoned the Liberal well.
Yeah.
And I was actually surprised to see Carney come in and run in the leadership race when Trudeau resigned.
Yeah, so was I.
Yeah, because I was expecting that he was going to wait an election, let the Liberals lose, not take that risk on himself, and then come in as the white horse that would save them and win the next election. That's what I saw happening, given the polling and everything that was around. I didn't think that somebody like Mark Carney would put themselves on the line from the comfort of his private, firms that he was involved in, and make that risk. But I mean, credit given where credit is due. He did it. It's never an easy to put yourself out there, especially when you don't have a political background. And I was, as a conservative, I was quite impressed with him for the most part. He is adapting to being a public figure quite quickly. And good for him. I have cautious optimism going forward. I probably won't give him as much time to make some real impacts as other people will, but at this moment, I do stand cautiously optimistic that something positive will change here. Yeah, I think we'll probably, given the dynamics, the NDP not really being a key figure anymore. Like, they were propping up the Liberal government, whether or not they're really going to have a place in the current parliament. John, where do you see, how do you see this parliament working? Like, where do you see us going? Do you think it'll last 2 years, 4 years, 5 years?
Well, it's a minority parliament. It's a very large minority, but it's still a minority. I've heard that the Liberals are doing a full court press on some NDP members, and I think Liz May wants to be the speaker, so that'll give them an extra vote. So I think the Liberals are trying very hard to get to majority status by reaching out to some. I think there's only 6 NDP members, and perhaps some Conservative members as well. The record historically for minority parliaments is about a year and a half. We have had minority parliaments in Canada historically that it's weeks, not months or years. I don't think there's any appetite for another election. So my prediction is the Liberals get some folks to cross the floor with various incentives, cabinet seats, things of that nature. And they do get to a bare majority status over the course of the next parliament. And I don't see there being another election probably until closer, probably 2028 maybe. 2029.
At the earliest, I would say, especially if they get majority status. I would even push that to 2030. Given the 5 year swing in federal mandates, but
Well, and there's so much uncertainty with Donald Trump. Like every day I pull up my phone and Donald Trump has said something new or done something new. And, I just pulled up my phone the other day and heard that Carney capitulated on the digital service taxes, which and that's a perfect example is from a political standpoint that's useful in terms of it was a noose around their neck and I couldn't get any news on Facebook because Meta ignored it. But from a policy perspective, what a lot of these companies are doing, the digital companies, are they're taking the work from those organizations that generate that news. So how are we going to have people that generate news if you don't have some sort of a tax for people that take that news and monetize it? So from a public policy perspective, that's really good public policy because it protects people that are doing the work and getting the news. But from a political standpoint, it's just suicide. A lot of Trudeau's climate change policies were quite similar as well in terms of, do you want to have less carbon in the atmosphere? Yes, you do. But that consumer carbon tax, where every time someone pays their electricity bill or they fill up their gas tank, they're reminded that they're getting taxed on it. It was just an absolute albatross and was really untenable and was dragging the party down. And I think Carney and the party so much admitted it, that this was good policy but bad politics, and that's why it no longer exists anymore.
Yeah. I think that's all very astute, and the fact that you touched on the carbon tax, as a conservative, I'll take that bite.
No, you would.
I am no lover of the carbon tax. In terms of economics, something that's important, I think, for the average person to understand is when you're talking about goods and services, you have elastic goods and you have inelastic goods. And elastic goods, as you might recognize from the term, have a tendency to be very forgiving in terms of prices because those goods and services are in high demand.
When you need them.
And you need them, and there's nothing that can readily replace them. So gasoline being a prime example, if you're going to throw a tax on that, yes, some people that can afford it are going to move away from it. But the vast majority of people and the way that the economy works, moving things by boat, train, truck, automobile, in even a lot of the mail carriage that happens in this country is all very dependent around gasoline. And so when you go to tax that and say, oh, we're going to disincentivize people to move away from using gasoline.
Yeah. But what are they going to do?
Well, yeah. In what sensical world is $450 every 3 months, if in fact you are a family of four, going to pay for an electric vehicle? It's not even going to come close. So, I mean, to tax somebody and then rebate them the money and say that you're doing a good job, and then I think for the Canadian government to come out and still not have any hard numbers on what the results were for greenhouse gas reduction as a result of the consumer carbon tax, it was a massive policy failure, and one that I think you probably could have seen coming from a long ways away. One, given the fact that we're a northern climate, we do heat our homes largely across Canada with natural gas, some with heating oil. Those are not things that are readily or cheaply replaceable. But then you had countries around the world that were starting to move away from a carbon tax when Trudeau was starting to introduce a carbon tax. And why? Because it destroyed their economy. And yes, Canada's economy and the world faced different challenges during our carbon tax period with COVID. But, it really was not it was not effective at all. I would say, and I think we can look back, and I think we can all agree that it really did not do its job. Now, there's two parts of the carbon tax that our listeners should be aware of. There was the consumer carbon tax, and then there's the industrial carbon tax.
One's been axed and one hasn't.
Well, yeah, exactly. And one of the things that Carney has talked about, not so much during the election, but definitely before, is his desire to, yeah, we might scrap the consumer carbon tax, but hey, we might really put that burden on the industrial carbon tax. So have we seen the end of it? Well, as John says, only the consumer one was axed. The industrial one still exists. And I will recognize that even in Alberta, we have had an industrial carbon tax here for a long time. I think it probably has a tendency to be a bit more targeted in how it's used and effective. I would say the government's a little bit more cautious about which green projects they fund out of that fund. But is it enough? I mean, that's always going to be a debate. Is that tier program that Alberta has going to be enough for the feds to accept that and not impose higher industrial taxes on Canadian businesses and ultimately consumers? Time will tell. But one of the most disturbing things I think about the move, as much as I hated the consumer carbon tax, it was transparent, right? You saw on your bill, like your home heating and electricity bill, you paid $80 to $100 or however much you paid per month in carbon taxes. With the axing of the carbon tax and moving that over to industrial emission, the industry is not going to eat that. I think most common sense people know, like gas companies are not going to say, oh, well, you're taxing us on the industrial side now. Well, we'll eat our profits. That's fine. We'll just accept that we're making less. That's not how it's going to work. As a consumer, you're still going to pay that increase in tax, but it's no longer going to be transparent. And from an economic side and a consumer side, if I was going to be paying a tax, I would like it to be transparent. So, hooray, you scrap the consumer tax, but if the industrial tax goes up and our costs go up and we can't really see transparently what the exact cause of that is from month to month, that's going to be very problematic. And I think even politically tumultuous if Carney doesn't do that right. If he moves forward with that and costs go up again, but people can't even see where it's going and they're not even getting a rebate for it, that could be the hill he dies on. Like, people have given the Liberals another chance. They see Carney as a different person and a different leader and a different way of running the economy. And if he fumbles that, I don't know that there's going to be a whole lot of patience to give him any leeway on that.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. I think with the carbon tax, there were some positives that came out of that. One of the positives that I can think of right off the top of my head was that the vast majority of the Green Line in Calgary was funded through the carbon tax. Also, a lot of low-income families got a disproportionate amount of rebates through the tax. I know I definitely enjoyed a little extra bit in my kit 4 times a year when it came through. So yeah, I think though that like what this policy wanted to do, I think, was to decrease emissions and work towards a cleaner climate. Objectively, that has failed. So there are many policy ways to go about that. I'm not sure if there are any ways that don't involve increased costs, though, because as you said, if you put industrial tax or if you put the burden on producers, they're almost certainly going to pass that on to consumers. And are they incentivized to lower their emissions? Not necessarily. if it costs them $5 more to do, business per, whatever it is, they're just going to say, well, we'll just pass that on.
Yeah.
So,
The
yeah,
only hope,
it's a difficult square to circle.
yeah, the only hope that a policy like that would really have of succeeding is for a private business, maybe even in another country, finding an innovative way to make the same thing with less emissions, not have to be subject to the tax, and then reduce their cost that way, and then thus become more competitive. But you know, how do you do that? I'm not sure that the innovation is there yet. In terms of some of what we can do, I personally am a big proponent of nuclear energy. The small modular nuclear reactors are above and beyond and far more advanced than anything that we've seen historically with nuclear energy. We're not even, Chernobyl is not a thing. You're not going to see nuclear plants blow up like they did. And even the technology that's being used in nuclear power in southern Ontario that's been there for decades, these small modular reactors are far superior in terms of safety and efficiency than what has existed before. And I know that for Alberta and Saskatchewan, it's been a little annoying up until recently. The federal government wanted to reduce emissions. Alberta and Saskatchewan and even Ontario said, well, how about small modular nuclear reactors? And Stephen Guilbeault, who was Trudeau's last environment minister, said, no, I don't even want to have a conversation around nuclear energy. And so that became a really frustrating thing, is we are trying to find solutions and you are stuck on wind and solar, which are not cutting it in terms of our generation needs or dependability, I think was the really big thing. We need to work together. And recently, a small modular nuclear reactor was approved. I believe it was for Ontario. So as that private proponent goes in and builds that reactor and acts on that, it'll be very interesting to see what happens to energy costs in Ontario, whether that does lead to cheaper energy. It'll certainly lead to a more dependable electricity grid. But will it lead to the cheaper energy that everybody is kind of hoping, or is cheaper at this point even important? Perhaps it's just, maintaining the cost that's there and just not seeing it rise anymore. I think that would also be a win from that perspective.
Well, and one of the things that probably more than any other factor brought down the Wynne government in Ontario a few years back now, was cost of energy that just went through the absolute roof.
Yeah.
And my understanding, and again, I invite someone to set me straight if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that there was a lot of adjustments to the energy grid in Ontario to phase in more environmentally viable, I guess, wind and solar solutions.
Yeah.
And that was, I believe, there was a direct correlation between the prices going up and the greening of the grid. So I think, unfortunately, is lower prices and green energy, are they mutually exclusive at this point? Possibly. They possibly could be. And ultimately, I need to know when it's minus 40 degrees that my heater will work, because I'll die if it doesn't.
Yeah.
I want a light to turn on when I flip the switch. And that's, I think, the expectation that every Canadian has. Interestingly, talking to some of my friends that lived in other countries, it was very normal to have periods where they didn't have electricity or they didn't have these things that we take for granted. So that was a bit of an eye opener, having that discussion. And I was talking, with my friend who grew up in India. I was so annoyed that there was an hour blackout in my apartment and I couldn't turn on the microwave or do laundry, and I was very put out by that. And he was just like, yeah, you don't know what it's like to not grow up in a first world country. So
Yeah.
but it's definitely one of those things that everyone wants a cleaner environment and a cleaner grid. Are they okay with the implications of that? I don't know.
Yeah. Probably not. I mean, I wrote a blog post many years ago about pipeline politics and how the environmentalists were up in arms. And this is going to be a great segue into our next topic here. But how, if the environmentalists and the extreme environmental wings like Greenpeace had their way, we would all be living in tents, made of sheepskins, as the indigenous used to here in Canada and even the States, and we'd be sitting around a campfire singing Kumbaya. The modern world as it sits right now, we are very, very dependent on oil and oil byproducts, whether that be even bicycles, the rubber on your bicycle, how that bicycle got put together with the machines and the oil lubricating those machines to put it together.
Yeah.
How did they get there from, the iron being pulled out of the ground to refinement to turning it into a bicycle and all those steps, and then back into a store where you bought it.
Even building a wind turbine.
Oh yeah,
that involves
a wind turbine. I mean that's
oil-based products.
And it's wind turbines. It's interesting you bring that up because it's not as recyclable as the environmentalists first purported it to be, and they get replaced more often than I think people realize. And they end up in a landfill. And these are not small objects. These wind turbines are very, very large.
Yeah, drive by Lethbridge and take a
look.
look.
Yeah. Anywhere in southern Alberta, you'll see the wind farms up there, which have also had a negative impact on the bird and bat population in particular. So
and land values.
And land values. It's cool to see, but I think how would you say it, John? The
implications?
Not the implications, but I think the wonder of the wind turbine is kind of worn off.
The novelty.
The novelty, yeah, that's the word. The novelty of the turbine is worn off, and now it's a great big eyesore. And you see the strings of them down the hills, rolling across the plains in southern Alberta, and I think people are kind of tired of looking at them. And yes, they do produce electricity. I'm not going to say they won't. I mean, southern Alberta is one of the most windy places on earth, given the way that the air comes over BC from the Pacific and down the Rockies. It creates a very, very strong wind force.
Sure does.
That is predominant throughout even the year in the winter. So is it effective? Maybe, but there are days where the wind doesn't blow, and if the wind's not blowing, those turbines don't spin, and electricity doesn't get made. So, all of this talk about energy here, we'll transition to a little bit of a discussion around, everything we've been talking about, the Canadian election, Carney, how he got himself elected. One of his major platforms was making Canada an energy superpower. Why is this a thing? Well, I'm sure that many of our listeners can appreciate if you're in Alberta or other parts of Canada. Alberta has been trying to get the eastern part of Canada to accept oil pipelines out east and the building of refineries for a very long time. I would say decades. It's been a constant battle. And for those who don't know, the way that energy through oil and oil byproducts currently gets supplied largely to Eastern Canada is Alberta sends oil down the Keystone XL pipeline, or sorry, just the Keystone pipeline. XL never went through. Down to the States. It gets mixed in to the States' supply of oil. And this is an important note because once it crosses the border into the States, it's no longer differentiated as Canadian or American oil. It is now treated as American oil and sold as such. The Americans have done a great job of creating refineries down there. They turn that bitumen that we send them into gasoline, jet fuel, and various other oil products, and they send it all up through Line 5 for the most part, through Ontario and the Great Lakes. And that is largely, not solely, but largely supplies Eastern Canada, Ontario, and Quebec in particular with those energy needs. And why is this important? Well, as we all know, Donald Trump became the president, slapped tariffs on everything, though they've gone up and down and paused and non-paused. And I'm not even sure that Donald Trump wakes up and knows what he's going to do that day, but it's made it very chaotic. And I think it's woken up Quebec in particular. I wouldn't say Ontario because at least Premier Ford has been a proponent of oil pipelines out there. But I think provinces like Manitoba and Quebec have finally realized, if there was to be a tariff on energy, our costs are going to go through the roof. Maybe we rely on this more than we thought we did. We took this for granted, and they suddenly seem to be far more amenable to things like an oil pipeline. And that's one of the cornerstones, I think, of Carney's energy superpower concept is let's build these nation building projects. Let's get them going so that Canada has the ability to trade, but can also stand on its own and not be so dependent on other nations for not just trade, but actually refining and sending it back to us so that we can pretend like we didn't have any part in that production.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that there are east to west national pipelines, and there has been since the 50s. There was a great pipeline debate actually in 1957 Parliament between Saint Laurent and Diefenbaker, where incidentally the Liberals under Saint Laurent were in a big hurry to build a pipeline and weren't really paying much attention to what other people thought. So kind of an interesting.
Is that an oil pipeline or a natural gas pipeline?
That would be the natural gas pipeline.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So you're right in that there's very limited, if any, pipeline infrastructure that goes east to west. We do ship oil, as you know, via rail and via tankers. So we do have means to get it from Alberta to Ontario and Quebec and Newfoundland and the Atlantic provinces.
But not nearly as cheaply or efficiently as a pipeline would.
Correct.
And I would note, I mean, when we're talking about a train, trains have much more propensity to derail and create a massive spill than a pipeline does.
Statistically, you're much more likely to have environmental destruction through a train derailment than a pipeline. The issue with the oil pipeline in particular, it's a geological issue and a political issue. So geologically, you're going thousands of kilometers east to west. Through the Canadian Shield, if you're going into Quebec and Ontario and east of there, which creates a logistical nightmare from an engineering perspective. And then you have to have the government of Manitoba, the government of Ontario, the government of Quebec. You have a lot of provincial governments that have different thoughts on it. Saskatchewan is a conservative government, the Saskatchewan Party. You have the NDP in Manitoba, you have Doug Ford and the Conservatives in Ontario, and then you have Legault and the CAQ in Quebec, and then various liberal and conservative governments in Atlantic Canada. And then, if in case it wasn't complicated enough, you have the various Indigenous communities that
Yeah.
it's going through. So
Yeah.
it's unbelievably difficult, both logistically and politically,
Yeah.
and will take probably decades, maybe not decades, but a long, long, long time, which I believe is the prime reason why the private sector has said, "Hey, we don't want anything to do with it," just because
Yeah.
there's too many things that could go wrong.
Yeah. And I think and that's one of the things that lend well to this discussion is our discussion about reconciliation in our the first end of this segment, um, where Carney is saying, yeah, we'll speed up these processes by approvals in 2 years. You might get the federal approval in 2 years, but it's going to be those constant challenges along the way. Um, you know, are those going to go away? No, those are not going to go away. And east to west, or sorry, west to east, for an oil pipeline, that'll be interesting to see if he can manage it. I think right now, Alberta in particular isn't really so much laying their chips on a west to east pipeline. They actually want to revive something like Northern Gateway, which is kind of roughly mapped out already. And, that would be Alberta to the BC coast. Um, but there are headaches in the way, even in federal legislation. I mean, Carney's passed this bill for major projects approval, but there are still things sitting in the way, like a tanker ban in northern BC.
Yeah.
That
Yeah, you can get the oil there, but who's going to pick it up?
Who's going to pick it up? How are you going to get it across? And I think something that's actually been very interesting to see is Smith has been very amenable when it comes to talking to the federal government, at least this new federal government, about pipelines. Is she's trying to find solutions, and whether the federal government is really listening or not, it's unclear currently. But she said, well, maybe if you don't want to remove the tanker ban, maybe you don't have to remove the whole thing. Maybe at least give us some kind of channel where tankers can come in and out, safely without, bumping into each other, where you largely still have a ban in place, but there is still a route to get in and out.
Corridor there, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it is very sensitive ecological land there.
Yeah.
I've also heard about proposals to go from Alberta essentially up to Churchill and Hudson's Bay.
Yep.
Haven't heard much about that recently, but
Yeah.
the big issue I have with the infrastructure and the pipelines is I am concerned about climate change. I am concerned about the environmental impacts about this, and by building these massive projects, does that lock us in to an energy source that is possibly not going to be around in a X number of years, 50 years, 150 years, 200 years. My understanding is that we have gas resources to last us hundreds and hundreds of years, and we do have the lower hanging fruit oil. I think is mostly gone. But we have massive bitumen resources in northern Canada. The cost, though, for those is A, it costs a lot of money to get that oil, and B, it's costs, the environmental effects in terms of, how much water you're using and how much energy you're expending to get those resources is quite substantial. I don't know if there's a connection. I haven't, looked enough about this, and I'd love to be, I probably should have looked into it before I talked about it. But I'm very alarmed at the amount of forest fires I'm seeing every summer now. That is, I believe, climate change that I'm seeing within my lifetime. Generally, the environmentalists talk about change over hundreds or thousands of years. I can't remember when I was growing up in Calgary in the 80s, there being smoke filled days. And, I'm in Edmonton now, but there's many smoke filled days. And in Calgary, there's many smoke filled days. Does that have to do with climate change? Does that have to do with policy around not or putting out every forest fire for 100 years and having it essentially be a million hectare tinderbox? There's probably, many different factors here. But right now, like I was on the listening to the radio on the way over here, Europe is having record temperatures and record heat waves. I think we are seeing human-caused climate change, and a lot of it is having to do with our consumption of fossil fuels. And do I, as a citizen that cares about the planet, want to lock Canada into more of the same? Again, like from an environmental perspective, it's probably not a great thing. But Canada makes money when Canada exploits its natural resources. So,
Yep.
from an economic perspective, it's a very sound thing to do.
Yeah. And, as personally myself, like I recognize that climate change is a thing? Yes, I do. Do I recognize that humans are having an effect on climate change proportionally in that we are making it worse? Yes. But what I think I might say, and one of the things that I've been thinking about in the past couple weeks in particular is, the natural cycles of the earth that we can see through science and heating and cooling. I think what we might be seeing is more of a human-caused speed up of climate change. And whether or not we would survive one of the Earth's natural cycles over millions of years, I think is anybody's guess. Do we have the technology now? Perhaps. But, that conversation is still going on as to we want to be stewards of the environment. We want to make sure that we have the ability to survive, let alone all of the nature and everything that we have around us. So we want to be those responsible stewards. But the demand for oil, I don't think it's going anywhere. Even with shifting technologies going to less emissions, I don't think the demand for oil is going to go down. I think it's how that oil is used is going to change, and what kind of emissions are created as a result of that change.
Less gas-powered vehicles, more manufacturing.
Right.
Yeah.
And what kind of technology exists for manufacturing that reduces emissions while still using oil. I think these are all things that are currently in the works in terms of innovation and research. Are we close to that? Probably not. But, and I've said this to you, John, for many years, we are going to have to use the wealth that we take from oil and gas and be very conscientious of putting it towards that research and development of better technology to reduce emissions. It's not going to happen overnight, but unless we want it to cost us our entire economy and our way of life, we are going to have to, unfortunately, for the foreseeable years, just accept that. And when it comes to forest fires, I thought it was interesting that you brought that up, because that's I think one of the things that people really see in climate change. It's very in your face now globally. I know in Alberta, 63% of wildfires are caused by humans. Do I think the climate change has made those fires worse? Yes, absolutely. I think they have. Warmer temperatures, drier conditions. I mean, when a fire starts now, you're talking about, a major wildfire instead of something that was more contained and created less smoke and breathing issues for everyone involved. So you know, yes, does climate change make it worse? Absolutely, it does. Have we had a role to play in that? Absolutely, we have. Is there a way for humans through their activities like riding ATVs, campfires, and whatnot to greatly reduce that? Yes, absolutely, there is. And I can tell you from listening to experts talk on how forestry has been done. I mean, a lot of the activists have previously said over the past number of years, well, you need to leave forests alone, leave the deadfall, let it rot. It's good for the forest. Um, it might have been good for the forest if humans were not a factor. But humans being a factor, and the fact that we want to be out, we want to be in nature, we want to camp. Lots of people want to use off-road vehicles. Leaving the deadfall there is not an option unless
just becomes tinder.
It just becomes tinder. Yeah, exactly like you said. It becomes this great big tinder box that as soon as a spark goes up, you lose hectares and hectares of forest space. So I think with a combination of not just the innovation coming from companies, but some very simple and immediate things that we can do, humans being more conscientious of being out in the environment and their responsibility to not start fires. And from a government and policy perspective, from making sure that the deadfall is removed, and maybe we even create corridors that are not forested. Maybe we look at making these swaths of corridors through forests that are graveled off, so that there is a break in between forests, so that if one does go off, it's not all connected. Maybe we look at that as well. And so, that's a conversation that needs to be had as we discuss going forward as an energy superpower here in Canada. Do we have the capacity to do it? Absolutely, we do. We have the resources, we have the technology, and we certainly have the expertise in Alberta and across Canada, even as far as Newfoundland, which also has oil production of its own.
Yeah, off the coast, yeah.
We have that capacity in Canada to be an energy superpower. It's going to come down to, do we have the political will? Do we have the social appetite to become that?
Well, and also, like, the Canadian experience in terms of infrastructure has very deliberately been done historically on an east-west basis. The railway, which was built back in the 1880s, it was much much easier if you would have gone through the States and utilized canals and the Great Lakes and stuff like that. But the forefathers, for sometimes nefarious reasons, went on a straight east to west line. Same thing with the highway system in the 1950s and 1960s. So, but since free trade in the 80s, we've become increasingly sucked into a north-south axis. And one beneficial thing about Trump is he has reminded us that the United States, who has historically always been our greatest trading partner, that's not guaranteed. And it is unwise for us to put all our eggs and all our infrastructure, certainly in terms of energy, on a north-south basis, where, as you mentioned before, we're giving them the raw materials and they're making the money off of it. Yeah. And also it's substantially limiting the ability of Canada to get our resources to market. So from a national, I think wellness is not the right term, but from a not being tied to one economic partner, it makes sense to build infrastructure in such a way as to make it east-west rather than north-south. The concern that I have is, what are the environmental implications of that? And yeah. In particular, in Alberta, most of the conventional oil has been tapped, and a lot of the oil that's left is the bitumen and the very, very energy extensive extraction oil that is happening. Also, right now in the United States, and I believe in other jurisdictions, we're seeing a lot of production come online with fracking and things of that nature. So there's less demand than there was previously because the supply is being introduced the supply is being increased quite substantially. But it's, yeah, like my biggest concern is around what are the long term implications of this, and also politically, Canada. Going back to the history, we have a very long political history of fracas and not getting along particularly well, whether it be Indigenous or non-Indigenous, whether it be English or French, whether it be Catholic or Protestant, whether it be different regions and different parties and political affiliations, and a knockdown, drag out national unity debate over energy. That's going to be tough to survive.
Yeah, yeah, and as much as we are a unified, I say that term with hope, a unified country. As you say, we all have our different interests and very different viewpoints. You have Francophonie in Quebec. Ontario's highly populated with manufacturing. Alberta has been a very traditional bed of conservatism, and where that came from, that's a future discussion. And BC, with the wonders of its natural beauty out there, mountains and the ocean front, is a very popular place for environmentalists to settle, and people that don't want that landscape to change. And so everybody is kind of going around, and we've all got our different strengths and our different priorities. And as you say, it's very complicated to get things done in this country with those competing issues and priorities.
Yeah. Well, we can't agree on the day of the week of this country.
Yeah.
It'd be hard enough to have a substantial agreement over a national infrastructure.
Yeah.
So the idea of Canada being an energy superpower, in theory, sounds like a good one. But like, what does that look like? What kind of energy? Who benefits? Who pays the price, if anything? Is this public or private? Is this both? How are Indigenous people going to be consulted? What Indigenous people you're going to consult? And then inevitably, over the course of that discussion, you're going to have provincial elections, and you're going to have different voices at the table, and it's going to be messy. I think it's possible. One thing that I've been impressed with by Carney in the couple months that he's been around is he seems to have a greater ability and enthusiasm to work with people than his predecessor. And he seems to have people around him that are less ideologically, instinctively opposed to energy projects, and by which I mean oil and gas. I think with the Trudeau-Guilbeault crowd, it was a hard no.
Yeah.
And they viewed Alberta in particular with a mixture of kind of loathing and disgust. That's definitely the sense that I got as an Albertan.
Yeah, and I recognize that Carney still has a lot of the same ministers in his cabinet as Trudeau did, but I think they've
not
been
playing the same role.
No, definitely not. And I think they've been given a shorter leash.
Yeah.
And said, this is what's expected of you. We are not moving in the same direction. Get on with it. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But as a final note from me, I think as we move forward in this discussion as an energy superpower, the idea that has been floated out there that kind of resonates with me the most, that I think will take longer to develop, but will give us a clearer roadmap if we are going to move forward with this, is predetermined energy corridors nationwide. Where do we want those corridors to be? What's acceptable to go into the corridor? And then you go through all those negotiations and permits and everything up front. It's done. It's approved. Now, this is your route. Build it or don't. I think that's going to be the way forward. It's going to take longer. I think, than just, oh, we're going to build this line from here to here and we're going to try to find a way to do it. But it's going to be the more simplistic approach, and it's going to be the one that offers us, I think, the longest term chance of success in getting this kind of infrastructure built across Canada.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And like I think one thing, well, I know one thing that slowed down a lot of the energy projects to date is there seems to be a disproportionate amount of court involvement with different groups saying that they're not consulted or they don't like the outcome, and then they litigate it, and then there's a decision, and then it's appealed, and then it's overturned, and this seems to take years and years and years. And so, yeah, if there could be some system by which there could be predetermined, and I'm when you were thinking about that, I was thinking about the recent bylaw changes when it comes to housing in Edmonton, where they say essentially this is kind of already pre-approved, this housing in this area. So you don't need to go through City Hall. You don't need to go through the whole permitting process. It's already pre-approved. The danger with that in Edmonton when it comes to housing is that if you kind of have a blanket, this is all okay, well, maybe not in each instance. So it would have to be very sensitively done. And yeah, it would be very difficult. One thing that I, again, like about Carney's someone who has a wide and many year experience in kind of the minutia of government bureaucracy, and I think he has a greater understanding of that. As a banker, I think he also understands the economic implications of his decision better than his predecessor, and really, frankly, better than almost any leader that we've had in recent Canadian history. Yeah, it's going to be a Herculean task to do it. I think it's a worthwhile task, and I am happy to hear him talk about it. I wish him every success.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be very interesting moving forward. And as those challenges come up, this is politics, folks. This is it. It's never the same. It always changes. You always have different people around the table, different viewpoints being expressed, constant changes in priorities. I can tell you as a political staffer, no day is the same because you're dealing with a new leader here or a new minister there, or whatever the case may be. There's always something emerging that's causing these priorities and focuses to change and evolve. So that's what we aim to do here. We aim to kind of discuss that for you and make sense of it. As the name suggests, real sensical politics, making it more clear and I guess more palatable to the average person than what they might read in the news or hear from word of mouth. And I thank you for joining us for this segment. Again, my name is Matthew, my co-host John, and we very much appreciate you tuning in and listening.